Most people believe wealth is built through hard work alone. They wake up early. They grind in silence. They stack skills for years, quietly waiting for someone to notice. But the truth is far more brutal. Talent without positioning is invisible, and invisible people rarely get rich. This is the quiet tragedy of the working class: brilliant minds, tireless hands, decades of effort, and still no seat at the table. Not because they weren't good enough, but because they never learned the one skill schools refuse to teach: the strategic architecture of connection. Sun Tzu understood something the modern world has quietly forgotten. In The Art of War, he never speaks of fighting alone. He speaks of alliances, of terrain, of knowing which battles to enter and which to avoid entirely by winning through position instead of force. Sun Tzu believed the greatest victories were won before the first move was even made, through preparation, positioning, and relationships built long before they were needed. Here is the uncomfortable part. Most people chase connections. They network out of scarcity, desperate for approval, sending messages that quietly reek of need. And desperation is detectable. It repels the very rooms it is trying to enter. The wealthy rarely chase. They build gravity instead. They understand something Sun Tzu mapped out over 2,000 years ago, that positioning always precedes power, and power always precedes wealth. By the time most people realize this, years are already gone. They built skills in isolation, waiting for the world to discover them, never realizing the world was never designed to search. It was designed to be pulled toward value it can already see. Meanwhile, someone with half their skill, but 10 times their positioning, is sitting in rooms they will never even hear about, rooms where deals are made, capital moves, and opportunities are quietly passed from hand to hand before the public ever learns they existed. So how do the strategically wealthy actually build the relationships that quietly compound into fortune? Not through luck. Not through charisma alone. Not by attending more events or collecting more contacts. Through a system, one Sun Tzu encoded into the philosophy of war over 2,000 years ago, and one almost nobody has ever translated into the language of modern wealth. That changes today. No fortune was ever built by one pair of hands. This is the first truth Sun Tzu quietly buried inside The Art of War, not a single chapter about fighting alone, because no general who fights alone survives long enough to win. Every campaign he describes depends on alliances, spies, supply lines, and men positioned in exactly the right place before the battle even begins. Wealth works the same way, and almost nobody is taught this. We are raised on the myth of the self-made fortune. The lone genius in a garage. The solitary hustler who clawed his way up with nothing but grit. It's a beautiful story. It is also mostly fiction. Rockefeller didn't build Standard Oil alone, he built a network of refiners, railroad men, and bankers who all had reason to move with him instead of against him. Even Andrew Carnegie, famous for his relentless drive, credited his fortune to what he called the ability to command the aid of many people. Sun Tzu warned that armies without allies eventually collapse under their own weight, no matter how skilled the general. Here is where most people quietly sabotage themselves. They believe if they simply work hard enough, wealth will notice them and arrive. But this creates a much bigger problem than they realize. Hard work performed in isolation is invisible, and invisible effort compounds into nothing. Think of the most skilled employee in any company who never gets promoted, while a less talented colleague rises simply because people know him, trust him, and want him in the room. Ask yourself honestly, how many of your current opportunities came from skill alone, and how many arrived through someone who already trusted you? For most people, the answer is uncomfortable. Sun Tzu's answer to this problem was never brute force. It was position, and that is exactly where the next principle begins. Sun Tzu never told his generals to chase the enemy. He told them to choose the ground first, because whoever commands the terrain commands the outcome before a single arrow is fired. This is the second layer most people miss entirely. The strategically wealthy don't chase connections. They build themselves into terrain other people want to stand on. Think about how differently you treat two kinds of people. One constantly asks for favors, introductions, opportunities. The other has clearly built something, a skill, a reputation, a body of work, and simply exists in the world, doing their thing. You are drawn toward the second person without even being asked. That pull is not luck. It is positioning, and it is learnable. Naval Ravikant, the investor and entrepreneur, built his reputation for years writing and thinking in public long before most people knew his name. He wasn't hunting for connections at conferences. He became terrain, a body of ideas so valuable that the right people eventually found their way to him. This is where most people get trapped. They treat networking as an activity, something you go and do, rather than a byproduct of something you build. But here's the deeper danger nobody warns you about. Position without substance collapses the moment it's tested, just as an army holding the wrong ground eventually falls no matter how confident it looks. A rented title, a borrowed lifestyle, a curated image with nothing behind it, these crumble the first time someone actually leans on them for value. So ask yourself, if someone influential walked into your life today, would they find solid ground, or would they find someone still constructing the foundation? Sun Tzu understood that terrain alone isn't enough, timing matters just as much. And this is exactly where most people, even after building real value, still get the next move dangerously wrong. Sun Tzu wrote that the skilled fighter puts himself in a position where defeat is impossible, while waiting for the moment the enemy exposes weakness. He never rushed forward exposed and desperate. He waited, controlled his presence, and let the enemy wonder where he would strike next. This is the exact opposite of how most people approach opportunity. Picture the version of yourself that replies to every message within seconds, agrees to every meeting, says yes to every request just to stay relevant. It feels productive. It is actually the fastest way to become invisible, because availability without discernment reads as desperation, and desperation has no scarcity value at all. The market, whether it's investors, employers, or clients, instinctively prices down whatever appears unlimited. Steve Jobs understood this instinctively. Apple's product launches were built entirely around controlled scarcity, limited reveals, closed doors, information released only when it created maximum tension. But this principle isn't reserved for billion-dollar companies. A freelancer who is selectively booked commands higher rates than one who is desperately available. A person who doesn't answer every text within a minute is, paradoxically, more magnetic than one who does. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. Most people confuse scarcity with arrogance, so they overcorrect into pure availability, terrified of seeming difficult or being disliked. But Sun Tzu never confused patience with weakness. He simply refused to move until the position favored him, understanding that the fighter who waits often wins battles the impatient one never even sees coming. Ask yourself, in your own life, where are you giving away unlimited access to people who haven't earned it yet? That answer usually reveals more than any resume ever could. Scarcity alone, however, only controls how people perceive you from a distance. The real leverage begins the moment you understand who actually delivers your best opportunities, and it's rarely who you think. Sun Tzu placed enormous value on spies, not soldiers, not generals, but quiet outsiders who moved through unfamiliar territory and returned with information no one inside the army could ever access. He understood something counterintuitive: the people closest to you already share your knowledge, your circle, your blind spots. The real intelligence comes from further away. This is exactly what modern research quietly confirms. Stanford sociologist Mark Granovetter discovered that most people find their best jobs not through close friends and family, but through distant acquaintances, people they barely speak to. Your inner circle already knows what you know. Your weak ties live in entirely different worlds, with entirely different opportunities, and that's precisely why they can hand you something your closest friends never could. But this creates a problem most people never notice. We instinctively invest all our energy into our tightest circle, the same 5 people, the same group chat, the same familiar faces, while ignoring the 100 loose connections scattered across other industries, cities, and rooms we rarely enter. It feels safer, more comfortable, more familiar. It is also strategically limiting. the same way an army that only scouts its own camp learns nothing about the terrain ahead and walks blindly into surprises it could have easily avoided. Think about the last genuinely valuable opportunity that entered your life, a job, a deal, an introduction that changed something. There's a strong chance it didn't come from your closest circle at all. It came from someone you barely kept in touch with, a former colleague, a distant introduction, a conversation you almost forgot you had. Sun Tzu never dismissed strong alliances either, but he understood that intelligence and opportunity travel furthest through the connections you've neglected the most. And once those distant doors open, an entirely different principle determines whether they stay open. Sun Tzu wrote that the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting at all. Most people hear this and think only of conflict. But the deeper application is about influence, winning someone's trust, attention, or opportunity without ever having to ask, demand, or negotiate for it directly. Reciprocity is how that quiet victory is engineered. Here's the mechanism most people never think strategically about. When you give something valuable first, insight, help, a resource, a connection, before asking for anything in return, you create a psychological imbalance the other person unconsciously wants to correct. This isn't manipulation. It's simply how trust compounds between two people who haven't fully proven themselves to each other yet. Consider how Andrew Carnegie built his empire of relationships. He famously gave away libraries, funded institutions, and positioned himself as a source of value long before he ever needed anything from the people he helped. By the time he needed capital, influence, or access, he wasn't a stranger asking for favors, he was someone people already felt indebted to. This is strategic generosity, not charity for its own sake. But this creates a trap for people who misunderstand the principle. Giving without strategy, scattering favors everywhere, to everyone, with no discernment, dilutes your value instead of building it. Sun Tzu never wasted resources on ground that didn't matter, and neither should you waste generosity on people who will never remember it, let alone return it. Ask yourself who in your life you've quietly helped without ever mentioning it, without keeping score, without expecting anything back. That silent ledger, whether you realize it or not, is already working in your favor, waiting for the moment it matters most. Reciprocity builds trust. But trust alone doesn't protect you from wasting years on the wrong people entirely, and that's the mistake almost everyone eventually makes. Sun Tzu warned that the general who fights every battle offered to him will eventually be destroyed, no matter how skilled he is. Resources are finite. Time is finite. Attention is finite. And yet most people say yes to nearly every connection that crosses their path, terrified of missing the one that might have mattered. This is where the filtering principle becomes essential. Not every relationship deserves equal investment, and treating them as if they do is one of the quietest ways ambitious people drain themselves dry. The coffee chat that leads nowhere. The group chat that only complains. The acquaintance who only reaches out when they need something. Each one individually feels harmless. Together, they consume the exact energy that could have built something far more valuable elsewhere. Warren Buffett is famously ruthless about this, guarding his calendar the way a general guards his supply lines. He has openly said that the difference between successful people and truly successful people is that the truly successful say no to almost everything. That single discipline, protecting attention as fiercely as capital, is precisely what Sun Tzu meant when he spoke of choosing ground wisely rather than defending every inch of territory offered to you. Here's what makes this uncomfortable. Saying no feels impolite, even selfish, especially to people raised to believe kindness means being endlessly available. But an army that defends everywhere defends nowhere effectively, and a person who says yes to everyone eventually has nothing left for the relationships that actually matter. Ask yourself which connections in your life are quietly draining your energy while offering nothing in return. Filtering isn't cruelty. It's the same discipline that separates strategic wealth from exhausted mediocrity. And once you've filtered correctly, an entirely different force takes over, one that requires nothing but time. Sun Tzu never promised quick victories. He warned that a prolonged war fought with impatience destroys the very army trying to win it, but a war fought with patience, at the right time, on the right terrain, wins with almost no resistance at all. Relationships built for wealth follow the exact same law: they are not transactions. They are campaigns measured in years. Most people treat networking like a single conversation that should immediately produce results. They meet someone once, ask for something, and feel disappointed when nothing materializes. But real relationship capital works like compound interest, invisible for a long time, then suddenly, undeniably powerful. The people who seem to have lucky connections rarely got lucky. They simply stayed in contact, added value quietly, and let years do what a single meeting never could. Warren Buffett's decades-long friendship with Charlie Munger wasn't built in a single negotiation. It compounded across a lifetime of trust, shared thinking, and consistent presence in each other's lives. The same principles Sun Tzu applied to alliances that had to hold steady through years of shifting circumstances, not just a single battle. Here is where most people quietly fail without realizing it. They abandon a connection the moment it doesn't produce immediate value, not understanding that the relationships paying off today for strategically wealthy people were often planted 5, 10, even 15 years earlier, with no guarantee they would ever return anything at all. Ask yourself which relationships you've already invested in, but abandoned too early simply because the timing wasn't yet right, or the payoff didn't arrive on your schedule. Sun Tzu would tell you the ground hasn't shifted, you simply stopped waiting one season too soon. This patience is the final ingredient. Everything you've learned so far only compounds if you're still standing there when the moment finally arrives. Sun Tzu never taught his students to fight harder. He taught them to fight smarter, to position themselves so precisely that victory became almost inevitable before the first move was made. Wealth works exactly the same way. It was never only about working hard in silence, hoping someone eventually notices. It was about becoming the kind of terrain worth standing on, the kind of presence worth waiting for, the kind of person whose generosity and patience quietly compound into leverage most people will never understand. You now know what most people never will. That connections aren't chased, they're attracted. That scarcity, not desperation, creates gravity. That your weak ties often hold more value than your closest circle. That reciprocity is strategy, not sentiment. That filtering isn't cruelty, it's discipline. And that the relationships paying off for the wealthy today were often planted years before anyone else was paying attention. This is the identity shift that separates the strategically wealthy from everyone still fighting the wrong battle. You are no longer someone begging the world for a seat at the table. You are someone quietly building the table itself, patiently, deliberately, one strategic relationship at a time. Sun Tzu understood that the greatest victories are won long before the battle is visible to anyone else. Your battle for wealth is no different. It is being won, or lost, in the quiet decisions you make about who you invest your time, trust, and value in today. If this reframed the way you think about wealth and connection, you already know what strategic people do next: they don't let a lesson like this disappear. Subscribe, and step further into the philosophy almost nobody else is teaching.